Fjords in New Zealand are among the most dramatic and visually striking natural landscapes in the world, and Milford Sound stands as one of the clearest examples of this raw beauty, where deep waters stretch far inland and cut through towering mountain walls that have been shaped over thousands of years by slow-moving glaciers, carving long, narrow waterways through solid rock and leaving behind a landscape defined by depth, scale, and powerful natural contrast. As steep cliffs rise directly from the surface of the fjord and dense forests cling to their sides, creating a scene where land and water feel inseparable, and where the size of the environment immediately gives a sense of distance from modern life and human scale. These fjords were formed during the last ice ages, when massive glaciers moved slowly through the valleys, grinding and shaping the land beneath them, and when the ice eventually retreated, seawater filled the carved valleys, transforming them into the fjords seen today. Long channels of water bordered by sheer rock faces and mountain peaks that appear almost vertical, giving the impression that the landscape was not gently shaped, but carefully carved by time itself, leaving behind surfaces marked by erosion, texture, and age. In New Zealand, fjords feel especially remote, surrounded by protected wilderness where human development is minimal and nature remains dominant, allowing forests, rock, and water to exist in balance without interruption. And this sense of remoteness is amplified by the scale of the environment, where even large boats appear small against the vast cliff walls and open water, reinforcing the feeling that this is a place shaped entirely by natural forces rather than by human design. The mountains surrounding the fjords rise sharply from the water, their peaks often hidden by clouds that move slowly through the valleys, adding layers of depth and atmosphere to the scene, while changing weather patterns constantly reshape how the landscape appears, making the same fjord feel different from one moment to the next, sometimes clear and sharply defined, and at other times softened by mist and rain that blur the edges between sky, land, and water. This constant interaction between water, rock, light, and weather gives New Zealand's fjords a living quality, where the landscape feels active even in stillness, and where time seems to move according to natural rhythms rather than human schedules, creating an environment that encourages observation, patience, and a quiet appreciation of scale, silence, and endurance, setting the foundation for the deeper experience that unfolds as one moves further into the fjord. In New Zealand's fjords, water becomes the central element that defines both the landscape and the experience, flowing quietly through long, narrow channels carved by ancient ice and reflecting the mountains, forests, and sky above, creating a surface that constantly changes with light and weather, while frequent rainfall feeds countless waterfalls that appear suddenly along the steep cliff faces, flowing directly into the fjord below and adding gentle movement to an environment that otherwise feels still and deeply calm, especially in places like Milford Sound, where rain is not an interruption but a natural and expected part of the landscape. Mist and low cloud often drift slowly through the valleys, moving between mountain walls and across the surface of the water, softening the sharp edges of the cliffs and reducing the world to layers of muted tones and subtle shapes, creating moments where visibility changes gradually and the landscape feels almost suspended in time, as if the fjord is revealing itself slowly rather than all at once, encouraging patience and quiet observation rather than quick movement. Sound in a fjord is minimal and carefully shaped by the environment, with silence broken only by the distant rush of waterfalls, the gentle movement of water against rock, or the occasional echo of wind passing through narrow valleys, allowing each sound to feel amplified by the surrounding stillness and making the absence of noise just as noticeable as the presence of it, creating a space where the mind naturally becomes more aware of small details and subtle changes. Weather shifts frequently in New Zealand's fjords, sometimes within the same hour, transforming the atmosphere from clear and open to moody and enclosed, as rain darkens the rock surfaces, clouds lower toward the water, and light becomes softer and more diffused, changing not only how the landscape looks but also how it feels, turning familiar views into entirely new scenes shaped by shadow, reflection, and movement. Waterfalls play a unique role in this environment, appearing temporarily after rainfall and disappearing just as quietly, reminding visitors that the fjord is constantly responding to natural cycles rather than remaining fixed or predictable, and this sense of motion within stillness reinforces the feeling that the landscape is alive, shaped moment by rain, light, and gravity. Together, water, weather, and sound create an atmosphere that feels immersive and grounding, where the fjord is not simply observed from a distance, but experienced through shifting light, moving air, and quiet echoes that surround and slowly draw attention inward, preparing the mind for deeper stillness and reflection as one continues further into the fjord. As time passes within a New Zealand fjord, the sense of movement begins to shift away from human awareness and toward natural rhythm, where light slowly changes direction across rock walls and forested slopes, shadows stretch and soften, and the landscape seems to breathe at its own pace, unaffected by schedules or urgency, creating an environment where minutes feel longer and attention naturally settles on small details rather than distant destinations. The scale of the fjord encourages humility, as towering cliffs and deep waters place human presence into perspective, reminding visitors that this landscape existed long before observation and will remain long after, shaped not by intention but by patience, pressure, and time, allowing stillness to feel meaningful rather than empty, and silence to feel complete rather than uncomfortable. Movement here is subtle and deliberate, shaped by the land itself. As water glides slowly along the fjord's surface, clouds drift steadily through the valleys, and light fades gently from brightness into softer tones, creating a continuous flow where nothing feels abrupt or forced, and where the absence of speed becomes part of the experience rather than a limitation. In this environment, the mind begins to slow naturally, responding to the steady presence of the landscape, letting go of distraction and focusing instead on the balance between strength and calm that defines the fjord, where steep cliffs represent endurance and still waters reflect quiet, and where both elements coexist without conflict. As daylight gives way to evening, the fjord becomes even quieter, with sound fading and detail softening, allowing reflection to take its place, not as an activity but as a natural response to the surroundings, where the landscape does not demand attention but gently holds it, offering space for clarity and calm. The experience of a fjord in New Zealand is not defined by landmarks or viewpoints, but by time spent within it, where observation becomes presence and presence becomes connection, creating a sense of grounding that lingers beyond the moment itself. In this balance between land and water, light and shadow, movement and stillness, the fjord reveals its true character, not as a dramatic scene to be captured, but as a living environment that quietly invites deeper awareness, slower breathing, and a lasting connection to the raw and enduring power of nature. Human presence within New Zealand's fjords is minimal and carefully balanced, designed not to dominate the landscape but to move quietly within it, where boats travel slowly across deep water, paths follow natural contours, and infrastructure remains subtle, allowing the fjord to retain its sense of remoteness and scale without interruption, especially in places such as Milford Sound, where preservation and restraint shape how people experience the environment. Unlike landscapes built around speed or convenience, the fjord encourages patience, as access is limited and movement is deliberate, reinforcing the idea that this is not a place to rush through, but one to enter slowly and with awareness, where observation becomes more important than arrival and presence matters more than progress. Conservation plays a quiet but essential role here, protecting forests, waterways, and wildlife so the natural systems that shape the fjord can continue to function without interference, ensuring that the balance between land, water, and climate remains intact, and allowing future generations to experience the same sense of scale, silence, and clarity that defines the fjord today. This restraint allows the environment to remain dominant, where nature sets the pace and human activity adapts rather than reshapes, creating an atmosphere where respect replaces control and simplicity replaces excess, reinforcing the idea that the fjord does not need improvement, interpretation, or explanation to feel complete. As the experience draws toward its end, the fjord remains unchanged, indifferent to observation yet deeply impactful, leaving behind not a memory of action or excitement, but a lingering sense of calm and perspective, where the absence of noise, urgency, and distraction becomes the most powerful impression. In this way, New Zealand's fjords offer more than scenery, providing a rare space where nature exists on its own terms, inviting people not to conquer or consume, but to observe, reflect, and quietly step back into a world shaped by time, balance, and enduring natural strength. As the journey through New Zealand's fjords comes to a close, what remains is not a single image or moment, but a lingering feeling shaped by stillness, scale, and time, where the landscape does not ask to be remembered, yet stays present long after it fades from view, leaving behind a quiet awareness of how nature exists without urgency, expectation, or the need to impress. The fjord offers no clear conclusion or dramatic ending, only continuity. As water continues to move slowly through carved valleys, mountains remain standing in silence, and clouds drift without direction or intention, reinforcing the idea that this place does not begin or end with the visitor, but simply allows brief moments of presence within something far larger and more enduring. In this environment, the absence of constant stimulation becomes meaningful, allowing the mind to rest in observation rather than interpretation, where nothing needs to be explained and nothing needs to happen, creating space for clarity, calm, and a deeper appreciation of balance between strength and gentleness, motion and stillness, sound and silence. The experience of a fjord in New Zealand is not defined by distance traveled or views collected, but by the gradual slowing of thought and attention, where awareness shifts away from time and toward texture, light, and subtle movement, and where the landscape quietly reminds us that value does not come from speed or scale alone, but from the ability to remain still and attentive. As one leaves the fjord behind, the environment remains unchanged, continuing its long existence shaped by ice, water, and gravity, while the observer carries forward a softened pace, a quieter focus, and a renewed sense of perspective, shaped not by instruction, but by presence. In this way, New Zealand's fjords offer something rare in the modern world, not an experience to consume, but a space to pause, reflect, and reconnect with a rhythm that moves beyond human design, where nature does not speak loudly, yet communicates deeply, and where the greatest impression is not what is seen, but what is felt long after the journey ends. After time spent within New Zealand's fjords, the landscape no longer feels distant or external, but slowly becomes internalized, where the memory of deep water, towering cliffs, and quiet air remains present even in silence, and where places like Milford Sound continue to exist not as images recalled, but as sensations carried forward, shaping how calm, space, and stillness are understood long after leaving the fjord itself. What the fjord offers is not escape, but perspective, as its vast scale and slow rhythm gently reset the mind, reminding us that the world does not require constant movement or attention to remain meaningful, and that presence, when allowed to unfold naturally, is enough to create connection and clarity. Here, nature does not compete for focus, nor does it demand reaction, instead existing with quiet certainty, allowing those who pass through to observe without judgment, to listen without interpretation, and to simply be within an environment that moves according to its own enduring logic. This absence of urgency becomes its own form of guidance, encouraging patience, restraint, and awareness, qualities that are often lost within fast-moving modern spaces, but which return naturally when surrounded by land and water shaped over thousands of years rather than moments. As memory replaces experience, the fjord continues unchanged, its waters still moving slowly through carved valleys, its mountains remaining firm and silent, indifferent to observation yet deeply influential, offering a reminder that permanence does not require presence, and that meaning can exist without witness. The journey through New Zealand's fjords ends quietly, without resolution or instruction, leaving behind not conclusions, but openness, where the mind remains softened, attention steadied, and perception widened, shaped by time spent in a place where balance replaces noise and stillness carries weight. In this closing moment, the fjord does not fade, but settles, becoming part of a slower internal rhythm, one that continues beyond the landscape itself, carrying forward the quiet strength, patience, and depth that define these remarkable natural environments. At the deepest level, New Zealand's fjords represent a world that exists entirely beyond human intention, and in rare moments, places like Milford Sound reveal this truth in an even more profound way, when the quiet sky above the fjord is touched by the southern lights, not as a spectacle to be expected, but as an extraordinary alignment of nature, time, and chance. These moments are rare and fleeting, appearing only under powerful solar storms, clear skies, and deep darkness, reminding us that the fjord does not promise wonder on demand, but allows it only when conditions far beyond human control briefly align, reinforcing the idea that nature does not perform, but simply unfolds according to its own rules. When the aurora appears above a fjord, the experience is not loud or dramatic, but subtle and humbling, as soft light moves across the sky while mountains and water remain unchanged, indifferent to the event itself, placing the observer in a position not of importance, but of quiet witness. In that moment, scale dissolves further, as the land shaped by ice, the water shaped by time, and the sky shaped by solar forces come together, revealing a perspective where human presence feels temporary, and the natural world feels continuous and self-sustaining. The fjord does not change because it is seen, and the sky does not light up to be remembered, yet the meaning of the moment lies precisely in this indifference, where beauty exists without intention, explanation, or repetition. This is the ultimate lesson offered by New Zealand's fjords, that the world does not exist to be rushed, controlled, or conquered, but to continue quietly on its own terms, sometimes revealing rare moments of light, and often remaining in silence, both equally complete. What remains after leaving the fjord is not the memory of rarity alone, but a recalibration of perspective, where patience replaces expectation, stillness replaces urgency, and nature is no longer viewed as a backdrop for experience, but as a vast, enduring system that allows us brief moments of presence within something far greater than ourselves. After the rare moments of light fade from the sky, the fjord returns to what it has always been, unchanged and complete in its quiet state, where mountains remain standing without recognition, water continues its slow movement through carved valleys, and the air settles back into silence, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred at all. In places like Milford Sound, this return to stillness feels natural, reminding us that even the most extraordinary events do not define the landscape, but pass through it gently, leaving no trace, no mark, and no need to be remembered. The fjord does not hold on to moments, nor does it wait for them to return, existing instead in a constant state of presence where rarity and routine carry equal weight, and where calm is not the absence of wonder, but its foundation. As darkness deepens and sound fades further, attention shifts inward, away from scenery and toward sensation, where breathing slows, thoughts quiet, and awareness rests without direction, shaped not by what is seen, but by what is no longer demanded. Here, the value of the fjord is not found in spectacle or scale, but in continuity, where land, water, and sky move forward without interruption, teaching that meaning does not require permanence of memory, only the willingness to be present while it passes. In this final stillness, the fjord offers no conclusion, no lesson stated aloud, and no call to action, leaving behind instead a softened pace and a quieter perception, carried forward beyond the landscape itself. What remains is not an image, but a rhythm, slower and steadier, shaped by time spent in a place that exists without urgency, explanation, or expectation, where silence is not empty, but whole. As the stillness deepens and nothing more is asked of the landscape, the fjord continues exactly as it always has, without holding on to moments of light, silence, or observation, allowing everything that passed through it to fade naturally, returning the land, water, and sky to a state where nothing needs to be noticed in order to exist. In places like Milford Sound, this continuity becomes clear, as the fjord neither remembers nor anticipates, remaining present without reference to what came before or what might follow, reminding us that even stillness itself is not something to possess, but something that passes through awareness and then moves on. Gradually, attention loosens further, no longer resting on scenery or sensation, but settling into absence, where description falls away and perception no longer separates observer from environment, allowing the fjord to return fully to itself, untouched by meaning or memory. There is no closing moment and no final image to hold, only the quiet release of engagement, where the landscape remains complete without recognition, and the observer departs without taking anything away. In this release, the distinction between experience and silence dissolves, leaving behind not a lesson or conclusion, but space, open, unmarked, and unclaimed. What continues beyond this moment is not the fjord itself, but a slower internal rhythm shaped by time spent in a place that does not hurry, explain, or respond. A rhythm that moves quietly back into ordinary life, unnoticed yet present. And so, without ending and without return, the fjord remains where it has always been, unchanged and sufficient, while everything that came to observe it gently falls away.